Okay, so we're now recording. I'm going to open the floor to any questions regarding the assignments. I see a lot of you had put in your group project already, and pretty much everybody put in their group project. The peer evaluations are going very, very well. I do want to remind you, I know a lot of you are pretty frustrated. Some of you are frustrated with how the groups are going. Again, this is an exercise in your ability to resolve conflict. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. It's very rare, but occasionally I think some of you are experiencing what it's like to have that frustration that you're doing a lot more than maybe you feel somebody else in your group is. Again, get used to group work. It's going to happen throughout your college career. It's definitely going to happen for many of you in your professional lives, in whatever profession you're choosing or major you're choosing in. So just be aware of that. Okay. This is, it's not a perfect world. So, just do your best and try and overcome the challenges that your group has and get the job done. I mean, that's the end result, right? All right. Before we begin, any questions? Anything at all? What are we in? We're in week 9, right? I think. Yes, we are in week 9. So sorry, I'm answering my own questions, having my own conversation. So week 9 is, again, this upcoming week, we have the rough draft due. So if you have not connected with your group yet this week, please, please, please do so, because really this is going to be the make or break of the groups. If somebody is not participating or has not shown up or committed to working towards the group, it's already reflecting in the peer evaluation. So I know a lot of you are thinking, well, we're doing the work, I'm getting an A, but so-and-so has not participated. So why do they get an A? They're not getting an A. If they're not participating and they haven't shown up well on their past few peer reviews, that's going to reflect on their grade. So don't worry about that. That kind of irons itself out. Even though your group is getting an A and that person that's not contributing is getting an A, it shows they're getting an A. They're not actually getting an A in the course if they're not participating at all. Okay. So any questions?
I do have a question. So
go ahead.
You put out something for the rough draft. It's under group project number 4, and it says this is how your paper should look as if you were turning in as your final project. It doesn't show anything. Like, is it just like that rubric that you're talking about below? Because I just see the rubric, but I don't see anything else.
Okay, Elena, help me out here. Where are you seeing that? Where are you clicking? Exactly where are you looking?
If you were to go into week 9, if you were to go into like the assessments tab.
Okay, 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Week 9 assessments. Okay.
Project number 4, rough draft.
Okay. Where is rough draft? Okay. All right. And this is how your paper should look as if you're turning it in. Okay. So if you click on that, oh, I see what you're talking about. Heat all. Oh, okay. All right. It looks like I'm missing some instructions there. So I mean, I have this posted several places. I will update this because I can see why that is a little bit confusing. But essentially, yeah, I think the message here is this is your final paper. This you want this to reflect as close to a final paper as you're going to turn in, because the more complete this is, the more fine-tuned my feedback is going to be for your paper, if that makes sense. So for example, and this happens from time to time, I'll get a group that turns in a paper that's maybe an outline or has a lot of holes in it or doesn't have the reference page or something like that. If that happens, I can't give feedback on that, which and I don't grade this too tough, but I give really thorough feedback. Now you get to the final project, when you turn in your final paper, I'm going to grade that really, really tough. And you're really not going to get any feedback because you either adhered to my feedback from the rough draft or you didn't. So that's kind of how that works. So for example, if you don't have a if you don't have a reference page for this one, I forget what the project is worth, you'll probably only lose about 6 or 7 points for not having a reference page. However, on the final project, that could be a significant part of it, like up to 20, 25 points off of your final project if you don't have your references listed. That's just as an example. So anyway, I'll put a little bit more information in there today, but you can get more information from the if you go into content And I believe group project, complete and submit group's rough draft, review the rubric. You should have the rubric in week. Let me see here. I thought there was a rubric in week 9.
Yeah, it is. If you go under the
Great.
assessment, it's attached at the
Uh-huh.
bottom.
Okay. Okay. All right. So rough draft, under rough draft, you mean?
Yes, it's under rough draft. However, I was more confused that like I didn't know if you were showing us like an example of like how it should be set up or
Oh, I see. Yeah. No. Yeah. So what I mean by this is that this should be your final paper. This should be what your final paper is looking like. Okay. That's what you're turning in. I'm sorry. I see why that's unclear.
It's all right.
So you're looking for an example. I'm saying this should be what it looks like, and you're expecting to have an example in there, right?
Yeah, that's what confused me. You're saying that like you're this is what's supposed to look like, and then there wasn't anything that showed up. So I was like,
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, just follow that rubric. If you click on that rubric, it'll show you exactly what I'm going to be grading. So the better you do on those points on the rubric, the higher the score you're going to get on your rough draft. Okay, and the better feedback you're going to get for your final paper. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. No problem. Any other questions? All right. So if nothing else, let's get to it. So kind of leading up to this point, we've really looked at the mind from a biological perspective. We can kind of see how neural pathways are developed. We then got into how learning occurs, right? Learning is a very basic survival function for any organism really to thrive in their environment, including humans. Now we've taken it a step above, and we have like secondary and tertiary reinforcements that meet beyond our biological needs. Like, for example, and when we get into motivation next week, we'll talk about why we do things at a higher level. Why do we go to school, right? A lot of us have gotten into school because we've associated that in some way through, again, a ladder of motivators. Because we want to satisfy our safety and our shelter and our biological needs. But we'll get into that next week. If we take a step back from that, we really have to understand how the mind incorporates our environment and how we learn to interact. And that happens almost immediately after we're born. And that's kind of where we're going to start off today. So throughout cognition, we're going to uncover several theories that have occurred or that have been developed over the years. And many of you are probably going to use these theories throughout your career and throughout your academic career. But I'm going to focus specifically on cognitive development today. Okay. So I do have a slide. I'm going to use a PowerPoint slide today just because I do want to get through some of this information a little quicker. And instead of writing it out, I think it'd be easier to do it this way. So bear with me so I can share my screen with you. All right. So like I said, today we're going to delve into developmental psychology, and it's essentially child psychology. And we're going to start by discussing Jean Piaget, who is a famous Swiss psychologist, and his theory of cognitive development. So put simply, cognitive development is the study of how we acquire the ability to learn, to think and communicate and remember. And theories of cognitive development, they vary in 3 different ways. And some theories are stage theories, for example, and they assume that development progresses in very distinct stages. Now, an example of that would be like if you think of a caterpillar or something. A caterpillar turns into a what before it turns into a butterfly?
A cocoon.
A cocoon? Yeah. So they go through very distinct stages. So we can see a caterpillar that spins a cocoon while it goes through that transition on the inside and then turns into a butterfly. And outwardly, we see that, right? Now, inside, there's probably more of what we consider a continuous. So based on what we're seeing, it looks like a staged form of development, but on the inside, it's probably more of a rapid continuous. An example of continuous, for example, would be the development of a tree that grows gradually and slowly over time without distinct qualitative stages, okay? The next dimension that we look at with cognitive development, along which theories, they vary, are domain general theories, whereas others are domain specific. So what do I mean by different domains of cognition or domains of thought? You can think of like mathematical reasoning versus linguistic reasoning. You know, we learned about some people are better at math and some people are better at reading, right? So those would be two separate domains. It could be language ability versus thinking morally, or versus thinking abstractly, or even thinking concretely. All these are different domains. And some of the theories assume that domain progresses the same for all of those domains, where others assume that they're specific to different domains. And again, I'm not going to get too much in the weeds on that, but similar to stage development, where stage assumes that there are stages, domain assumes that domains form independently, okay? And then last but not least, we have the differences between theories in source of learning. Essentially, what causes cognitive development? What are the underlying theories or stages over time? Okay, so getting into Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget is essentially considered the father of developmental psychology because he developed the first major theory of cognitive development. So where does that fit in terms of the dimensions we were talking about earlier with the stage versus continuous? Well, Piaget, he was the first and foremost stage theorist, and he believed that development passes through like these distinct stages that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. His account was domain general, because he believed that regardless of specific domain, that these were stages that underlie development, regardless of whether you're talking about math or whatever else. Okay, so stage specific and domain general is what he subscribed to. And his biggest contribution really to the field of psychology was viewing children as little scientists. He didn't see children as sort of this, dumb little object that are blobs just kind of going through the world. Much the opposite. He viewed them as scientists that experiment on the world in order to understand it better. Even something as simple like how babies stick toys or objects in their mouth, right? Many of you have either been around small kids and they're constantly putting things in their mouth, right? Probably some things they shouldn't be putting in their mouth, they still do. There's a reason for that, according to Piaget. We may view that as a silly baby thing, but he looked at it as experimentation. It's a great way to learn about physical properties of new objects, right? If you haven't encountered it before, you put it in your mouth and you can get some of the properties like the shape or the texture or the heaviness or even the taste. Yeah, something might have a pleasant or unpleasant taste for that matter. We talked about classical conditioning, right? If we make something adverse, they will likely, operant conditioning, they will likely not engage in putting that object in their mouth again, right? So he just viewed kids putting things in their mouth as experimentation in the world, which we'll talk about here in the first stage. So let's talk about his theory of cognitive development. Again, it was stage theory. And in this case, he had 4 distinct stages that he believed children pass through universally, regardless of where you're from. And we're going to focus on these 4 stages. The first one we have is sensory motor stage. Then we have pre-operational stage, and then concrete operational stage, and then finally the formal operational stage. So the first one is sensory motor stage. Okay, so in this stage, the sensory motor stage, it lasts from about 0 to 2 years of age, in which the world is experienced through senses and actions, hence the word sensory motor stage. Now, the important thing I want to pay your attention to now is the time frames that these occur, 0 to 2. If a child doesn't achieve a certain stage at 2 going into 3, it's not a big deal. Okay. It might be something worth looking at and keeping an eye on, but for the most part, these are just kind of a guide. They're not hard and fast rules. So if it happens earlier, great. If it happens later, maybe pay attention to it, but nothing too alarming if children are a little bit slow or fast on these stages. Okay. But so just general ballpark, 0 to 2 years of age. So this stage is really marked by focus on the here and now with no thought beyond the immediate physical experience. So what do I mean by that? Children cannot form mental representations, according to Piaget in this stage, okay? Now, I remember learning when I was going through introductory psychology course, I really didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what mental representation really is. And I think the best way to really consider this is think about a picture in your mind your favorite food. Okay, it could be anything. Mine is lasagna. All right, I love lasagna, so I can picture good square. Usually, I don't know what it is about lasagna. For some reason, the second day is always best. Anybody else find that? So anyway, picture whatever food you have, your favorite food, in your head, and form a mental image of that food, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it, the dimensions of it, the texture, and really create a picture in your mind. If you're able to do that, you have the ability to form mental representations. Okay, that's it. It's being able to hold something in your mind that isn't directly in front of you, and call that image to mind, and call that thought to mind, and picture it, right? So creating an image of it, even if it's not there, is mental representation of that object that you're thinking about. And Piaget believed that in the sensory motor stage, children lacked that ability. All right. So another key limitation of children in the sensory motor stage is that they lack object permanence. They lack the ability to understand that objects are indeed permanent and they continue to exist even when hidden from their view. So for example, if you were to take a child that's in a sensory motor stage and you were able to take an object and place that behind a barrier that the child could not see through, the child would really be confused. The child might think that that object is simply gone. It vanished. It no longer exists. And they would go about their day just like it never happened. This is an illustration that children in this stage lack object permanence. Now, I have a video that I'm going to show you at the end of this that's going to go through all these stages and kind of illustrate exactly what it looks like when children do negotiate these stages or when they don't negotiate these stages. Okay, and it's very distinct. So that's really it for the sensory motor stage. So let's look at the next stage, which is the pre-operational stage. Okay, so during the pre-operational stage, the age lasts from about 2 to 6 years of age, in which children they start developing words and they start associating those with images to represent things that are meaning. They're basically able to form mental representations, but they lack logical reasoning at this stage. Okay. And again, I'm going to have an example of what that looks like. So, there are two limitations of children in this stage. First of all, children in pre-operational stage, they lack the ability to perform what Piaget called operations, right? Pre-operational stage makes sense. And I'm going to describe that in just a moment. But the second thing, before we move on to an example of the first stage, is children are limited by egocentrism, meaning they view the world from really their own point of view. This is both a physical and literal thing. They think everybody sees what they see, but also it could be a conceptual thing. I used my daughter for an example. When I was overseas and I had called home, she had I had talked to her and I was asking if mom was around. I was done asking her how she was doing and asked if mom was around, and I didn't hear anything. A couple seconds later, I said, "Well, is your mommy around?" And again, didn't hear anything. And about a minute of doing this, my wife picks up the phone and talks to me. She said, are you asking her a question? I said, yeah. What was she doing? She was shaking her head yes. Now, why would she do that? Why would she shake her head yes when I couldn't see that?
She probably understands what you're saying, but she doesn't know how to put it into words. Like she's trying to process her sentence.
Well, maybe, but more importantly, what she was exhibiting is egocentrism, right? According to her, she was answering my question. She wasn't eliciting feedback from me. She wasn't making sure that I understood what she was saying. She was doing her job. And I asked her a question, she answered it. And that was it, right? Another example that I like to use for children in pre-operational stage is ask them what their favorite snack is. So let's say we ask Billy what his favorite snack is, and he says fruit bites. And then I say to Billy, what do you think my favorite snack is? Now, Billy, in the pre-operational stage, what do you think his response is going to be?
Fruit bites.
Fruit bites, right? So if I say, what do you think Madeline's favorite snack is? What do you think he's going to say? Fruit bites, right? So they think that everybody has the same preferences as they do, which again is egocentrism. And you can try this on somebody in the pre-operational stage, and chances are they're really going to do the same thing, okay? So let's get back to this idea of operations, all right? So here is sort of a depiction, and I'm going to show you again through a video how children actually work in this task. But depiction of one of Piaget's classic tasks is conservation of liquid, or the law of conservation. So what you're looking at are two cups filled, two cups the same size filled with liquid to the same level. And that's in picture A there. And when you see the third cup, which is a different size, it's obviously much thinner, taller, and longer. What you do is simple. First, you show the children that the first two cups have the exact same amount of liquid, and then you simply try to pour one of the cups into the thinner, longer cup. And then you ask children which cup has more liquid in it, and either the one on the left or the one on the right. And we know, hopefully you realize that these really have the same amount of liquid, but children in pre-operational stage, when they see this amount, they're going to look at what's taller, and because taller to them really means bigger. So they might make an error in this and say that the cup on the left contains more liquid, even though they saw us pouring that. So that's an example of children that haven't negotiated pre-operational stage. Okay. So third stage that we're going to look at is the concrete operational stage. All right. And so this stage lasts from about 7 to 11 years of age, roughly, in which children finally understand those concrete events, right? They understand the laws of conservation. They're starting to pick up on analogies, meaning they can pass Piaget's conservation, that liquid test we just showed, right? Oops, sorry. But going back to the concrete stage, so they may have the formal operation stage, and they're very law driven. We can see them stepping out of egocentrism, and they start developing their own form of psychology, thinking that other people do have different feelings. Maybe other people do have different ideas and different likes and dislikes. So that starts forming the concrete operational stage, but they still don't think hypothetically. They've got the mental representations, but they're not able to apply them really outside of themselves until they get to the final stage. We also see abstract logic really not there in children that are in this stage, as well as moral reasoning. Okay, but that brings us to so the concrete is kind of like a in-between stage, but this brings us to formal operation stage, where we do see children. This occurs from right around 12 years of age, according to Piaget, up through adolescence. And that's where we do see more abstract hypothetical reasoning occurring, as well as stronger moral development. Not really in place at 12 yet, but it develops up through adolescence, and in some cases, probably well into the 20s for some individuals. Okay, so that's really Piaget's theory in a nutshell. But what are some limitations of the theory? And we're going to talk, your book talks about it. I'm not going to get too much into what the limitations are. Between this, I will say that it is very limited to children's development. It doesn't really go beyond adolescence. But one of the, even though he's really the father of developmental psychology, he really has been the backbone for child development through many, many decades already, and he continues to be. Okay, so we do know that what he knew and what he believed was a little bit off. And the first limitation that Piaget, his theory, is that the development is more continuous than what Piaget believed, and we're finding that through research. As far as we know, for the most domains, they aren't specific stages that children really pass through. Instead, development progresses gradually over time. So even though they may not be able to grab object permanence right away, or it's not obvious, we do know that they develop that at a much younger age in different contexts. Okay. The next thing that we found on part of his limitation was that the tests were really high task demands. So when you look at lower task demands, so demands that don't put a lot of pressure on the child, they reveal a much deeper understanding than Piaget really originally thought. And finally, and I like this one, this is kind of my favorite one. It's funny, his entire theory was really based off his observations of his 3 children. And I think that that's pretty hilarious. He developed such a huge theory that changed the face of psychology and created an entire subdiscipline of psychology, all based on experimentation and observation of his own 3 children. Isn't that kind of cool? I wish I had that kind of influence. But anyway, so what I would like to do is just share with you a video that kind of demonstrates and just walk through some of these theories with you. Okay. Bear with me.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these 2 glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, did y'all see how that worked? So she assumed that because it was taller, even though she saw her pour that same amount in, she engaged in an error in law of conservation. Now watch, this is another classic example of what Piaget demonstrated.
Okay, you ready? Yeah. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So counting.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Counting is a reasonable task for her age.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than like that.
So instead, her error in here is not necessarily quantity, but it's, again, size. She looks at something that's spread out over distance as being more, right? Now look at this next example.
Looks like bigger.
All right, we're going to play a game with the graham crackers, and we're going to share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You shared You have those and I have this one.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there?
Okay.
Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have two.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl.
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here?
Pay attention to her instruction.
An owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And a little tree. And that. And that.
So what did he do? What was he pointing to her? She said, what am I seeing from my seat? What did he show her?
What he saw.
What he saw from his seat, right? That's an example of egocentrism.
So first we're gonna look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're gonna take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're gonna look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
Okay, so you see how that
It
works.
says, if you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break.
I knew that.
And then this one says, Dawn hit a glass with a hammer.
I knew that too.
So what happened to the glass?
It broke
It broke. Why did it break?
because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather's soft.
See, and part of that is what he did is he took rules that he knew. He engaged in looking at physics according to his world and what he understood that to be. And in his mind, feathers cannot break glass. And if you asked a similar, I've done this with this similar test with children, a pound of rocks and a pound of feathers, which weighs more? What do you think the answer usually is?
They both weigh the same.
Right. That's as an adult, that's what we would say that is. But given no set of rules, because we know feathers are light and we also know that rocks are heavy, but children that haven't really grasped that formal operational stage aren't able to think in terms of abstract yet. So, they haven't necessarily mastered that. So let's look at another example. And that's kind of what he's engaged in here now, is he's not understanding that even though the rule says a feather broke the glass, he can't think beyond that. He stopped his mental representation at that point. But this is negotiated. Once they've negotiated that and get it.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break. Okay. And the second one, Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
Okay, so she was able to apply hypothetical situations, which again is a good sign that the child has gotten into, or the individual has gotten into formal operational stage. Okay, all right. I know I kind of spent a lot of time on Piaget, and that's because, again, a lot of you that are going into either education or social work or psychology, you're going to be using this a lot, and understanding Piaget is going to be very important. It's a great foundation for other theories that may come along, especially with setting up learning environments and limitations to those. Okay. Any questions on Piaget, or anybody have any comments or anything to add? Okay. All right. So if nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.